Hello, I'm Toycat, and welcome back to the second channel geography video. Fun fact, today was officially the shortest day of the year for about 90% of the world population, and this is something that brings up the idea of daylight over and over again, and today I want to mention that did you know Americans are probably going to stop daylight savings? It seems as though the new President Trump is aiming at removing it, and this is because he thinks the practice is inefficient. This is something which he actually has a backer in Russia, because Putin also abolished daylight savings under the exact same logic, and I'm going to say something which is unpopular on the internet, but I agree with Trump and I agree with Putin, and indeed most of the world actually does. Here are the countries which observe daylight savings. As you can see, there are very few, and you might say in response, no Toycat, this is just the map of countries where you can drink the tap water. We are the civilized world and we use daylight savings because we're just so smart, but today I want to counterpoint that and want to prove that that is incorrect, not using history like we usually do, but instead using maps, logic, and geography, and let's do that today. Because the reason daylight savings exists can be simply put down to this one idea. People have a certain amount of daylight in a day, that is just a fact, and we consider it wasted daylight if the sun is up while we're asleep. People want to be able to go to work at say 8 to 9 a.m. and then come home from work and have the sun up at both times, because that's when you get vitamin D, which is important for our psyche. And so a lot of people would say that this wasted daylight can be removed by moving the entire clocks forwards. This is an insane way to do anything. Imagine anything else working this way, like, oh yeah, well I get home from work and the sun's not up. Rather than leaving work earlier or trying to reschedule the company, let's just instead change the clocks. Imagine if I kept showing up 20 minutes late to my train and I said, everyone, we need to change the clock so I can make my train, otherwise I get depressed because I get to work too late. This is what we have done on a near global level, except most countries, you'll notice, are in light grey here, and they've actually, it's not that they've never used daylight savings, that is true for lots of equatorial countries, but instead they had daylight savings and then they said, actually, was this really that useful? And the reason that many countries say that it's not is, I think we can put it down to a few main factors, but the biggest one really comes down to the fact that there is a big downside to the day that you shift the clocks. Even if there is a long-term benefit to the idea of daylight savings, there is which is very, very debatable, there is a very measurable increase in fatal accidents, which happen on the day that clocks sprang forwards. It's 30% the day they spring forwards, and it's 16% on the day they spring back. This is because people are more sleep deprived when you just rob them of an hour of sleep, which is what you have to do to give them an hour of sleep later. Although weirdly, the fact that even getting an hour of sleep will actually cause some people to increase in accidents too, shows that there's something about our circadian rhythm that you probably shouldn't try to mess with in that way. And so yeah, basically there's a massive increase in risk of medical errors, there's an increase in safety related incidents, and there's so many more things that you can say it's bad as a result of this, and the only good things you can say are that, oh yeah, it saves energy. We spend a tiny bit less on electricity, somewhere in that around 0.5 to 4%, based on the United States report right here, but as a result, we're saving a small amount in electricity, and we're killing people just so we can look at the chart and say, but I come home and the sun is up. And so yeah, as a result, very few countries are involved with it, and it really is, if you think about it politically, two big blocks. There is the United States and Canada, and then there's the European Union and countries which are closely linked to it, like say the United Kingdom, Switzerland, and all the other weird villain countries there, plus Ukraine just for fun, and Egypt and Israel, and we'll dive into that. But then I'm also being unfair when I mention just the blue countries, because fun fact, in orange, they actually observe daylight savings around the southern hemisphere summer, which means when we move our clocks forwards, they move their clocks back. This is not just a nightmare internally for like Australia, because fun fact, it means their time zones get messed up based on what time of year. When it's winter for us, their time zones are different than when it's not winter for us, which is kind of strange by itself. But what's even stranger, in my opinion, is the fact that, yeah, actually all of the southern hemisphere does it not just on the opposite, but very few countries actually decide to do it there. Why is this the case? And I think it actually, as much as I'd love to be like, the southern hemisphere are just so smart, actually it can be explained by looking at a globe. Did you know most of the landmass in the world and most of the population is in the northern hemisphere? Yeah, you probably do, but what you probably don't spot when you look at a flat map is just how much distance there is between Antarctica and all of the other continents. So if I do a quick, just to prove a point here, if we go from roughly the South Pole, which is going to be rough here, to the southern tip of Australia, Victoria, I don't consider Tasmania Australia, come at me, but it's about 5,500 kilometers just to get to the southern tip of Australia, and a lot more to get to the north. Australia's huge, by the way, it's a whole continent-sized country there, but the fact is that you have this giant gap between the South Pole and the most southern countries. Even when we talk about like New Zealand, which is quite a bit souther, again counterintuitively, you're still talking about like, okay, so by comparison, instead of going 5,500, it's 5,000. To get to South Africa, which feels like it should be close on a world, kind of isn't though, it's about 6,000. And to get to Argentina, it's 4,000, but that's as close as you get to the South Pole. Most humans live nowhere near the South Pole, but conversely, the North Pole, which is somewhere around about here, is actually quite close to people. I mean, if we say Iceland, for example, they're 2,500 kilometers away. If we look at Newfoundland, they're 4,000 away. And indeed, to get to that same distance that you would be in Australia, you have to go all the way to like Portugal or Morocco, or indeed, you get very, very far. Turkey, it looks like, is about far away from the northern hemisphere, despite being deep there on the breadth of two continents, as Australia is, being the very, very closest point to Antarctica. My point there is to say that countries in the southern hemisphere are so much less south than countries in the northern hemisphere are north. That means to say that the reason this is apparently a live news article is that our days get so short in the UK. I live in the very southern tip of the UK. If you look at the map, you can see I live all the way down there, but the further north you go, and especially as you get to Iceland, you get to the point where your days and nights are so variable based on the day and based on the year that you start to really, really value that time when you get 22-hour days in the summer and when you get 2-hour days in the winter. And so as a result, that's why we invented daylight savings, because there's only so much time in the day and we want it exactly when we can have it. It's kind of weird if you ask me, but that's what we've done. Anyway, so now we can say that is the case with why we use daylight savings way more in this part of the world. It's because we're just way further north than you probably realize. The south of the US definitely is not, but also the south of the US is, broadly speaking, where they're least in favor of daylight savings. Hawaii, which is the most, southern, below the Tropic of Cancer there, Hawaii is all the way, it might be Capricorn, but Hawaii is not using daylight savings, neither is Arizona, and then just to buck the trend, we've got Saskatchewan also saying that it's not going to be on daylight savings, but you can see like, okay, yeah, when you're really far south, you don't need it as much as countries that are north. At some point, Mexico had daylight savings, and then they decided, maybe not actually, although it looks like along the border they might still follow it. Again, the furthest countries south you can find that are doing it are like Egypt and Cuba, and this is likely due to the influence of the places that they interact with more than actually wanting daylight savings themselves. Again, I think everyone knows if you're watching this video and you have friends that aren't in your continental block, let's say, it's a pain that the clocks go backwards and forwards at different times, which is actually the clue to ending this. Because most of Europe, or all of Europe, goes back and forwards on the same schedule, and because all of North America goes backwards and forwards on their same schedule, they're actually kind of all tied into the same system. The reason that even though everyone, again, like, if you look into the actual studies, everyone agrees that daylight savings is a bad thing, but on an actual statistical level, the only people who don't are like, oh yeah, but I don't want to wake up later, man. That seems silly. I'll just move the clock backwards. It's but outside of those people, who I am very much opposed to, I should go less hard on that. I'm sorry. I want you to know. I apologize to all of you. But the fun thing is that every other place, basically these blocks are kind of the secret to ending this, because lots of places inside those blocks are starting to say, yeah, we're changing these laws. In Ontario, for example, which is the biggest Canadian province and would be like one of the top 10 states by population, in Ontario, they've said, yeah, we are going to change daylight savings in all of this area as soon as our neighboring places do. If New York and Quebec both get on board with it, just to show you here, they've only put on ice until New York State and Quebec both do the exact same thing, a commitment neither has made yet, then they will switch their clocks. A lot of Canadian provinces basically have the same thing set into their laws of like, yes, we have to do a lot of trade with the US. That is the fact of everyone. When everyone lives in Canada, so close to the border, you have to be closely linked to that country you're bordering. And so most provinces don't necessarily love it. They're just conceding like, yeah, British Columbia does a lot of trade with Washington. Having to desync twice a year, that's a pain. And so the solution to this is eventually one big push, and that's why it's a good thing that Trump is trying. I feel like this is one of those few things. Like, there are a lot of policies that every government wants to do that are largely just about, public opinion. I mean, the fact that the very top page here, the biggest thing that people want to read news about is about, that conflict, maybe the second thing there. There are some things which you can just pick a side on, and it's all ideological, and it's all about, yeah, let's get our people shored up. And then there are some changes that are like, again, might be broadly broadly unpopular, but are actually great changes. There's a lot of, you might call this technocratism, say, oh, you think the people are wrong, Toycat, do you? That's a dangerous stance to have in democracy for sure, but it is worth saying that there are lots of policies people won't like until they're implemented, and then they do like them. This is why I think basically every party has struggles with the economy, is because people want a good economy, but then they also want things that might lead to a bad economy, and how do you thread the line between the two things? I don't know the answer. But what I do know is that anyone watching this video, you need to know that daylight savings is over, and that, or at least it's gonna be over, and that is the point done and dusted. Except, no it's not. Here's my favorite little bit here. So even if, the fun thing is, there is now broad support, at least among top Republicans who seem to largely have control of most bodies of government inside the United States. That is a good sign for at least this maneuver, right? That, okay, the daylight savings is gonna be an inconvenient cost to our nation that's going away. But there's a really fun thing about this, which is, okay, we're abolishing time changes, but then what time do we go to? If we come back to Russia as an example, they've abolished daylight savings time. Yeah, that's really nice. But they actually had previously abolished daylight savings time in 2011 by switching the clocks to permanent summertime. I actually didn't realize they got rid of this until researching this video, but Russia doesn't have permanent summertime anymore. They have permanent wintertime, which is permanent standard time. A lot of people think that just like Russia did in 2011, maybe we should have permanent summertime. We don't want to switch the clocks backwards and forwards, but we also don't want to have the wasted time. And the easiest way to do that, which by the way, it's not wasted daylight, it's the same amount of daylight no matter when, but rant aside. If you don't want to waste the daylight and you don't want to have time changes, you just stick with permanent summertime. This is where this comes up, and this is the nerdiest map I'm going to show you on this channel. It was done by someone called Andy Woodruff, and I want to give them real credit here because they're coming out. They come to the idea that whether you like or hate daylight savings time, whether you want standard time or I guess summertime, basically depends on where you are. The way we draw the time zone map of the world right now has very harsh borders, right? And this is something which leads to very harsh differences on how much sunlight you get. So days with reasonable sunrise time, which is to say 7 AM or earlier, days with reasonable sunset time, which is 6 PM or later. The lighter the color of the map, the better. A very fun way to do a map about light, by the way. As you can see, if you live at the very west of a time zone, it sucks during the winter because you don't get a reasonable sunrise. And so you would wish that the sun would rise a bit earlier. Whereas everyone gets a reasonable sunset time, so how do you get the sun to rise earlier? You know, you get the idea, right? Whereas if daylight savings time were to be abolished, then you would have a more even split between sunrise and sunset. All of these places to the west of their time zones are going to be better off under daylight savings being abolished. That is, unless you want more unless you're willing to trade off all of your sunrises for a few sunsets. So daylight savings time is great if you live on the west, whereas permanent, permanent daylight savings time, permanent summertime was in effect, then that would be really, really great for people living on the east if those people also really, really want to have more of these things. You can see there is a huge difference between how much sun time you get just based on how west or east you are, because in effect, if you live in the middle of this zone right here, you should be in a different time zone to if you live on the center, or sorry, in the east or the west, and that's the actual problem you have to solve. How do you let people decide their own daylight savings time? Well, in the same way that we don't force everyone, to wake up at 7:45 AM, or we don't force everyone to live an hour and 25 minutes away from work, or whatever other things we don't force people to do, the easy solution, right, is you say, okay, let's set a time. I think the best idea is permanent standard time. And then, if that is broadly dislikable, why don't we all move the workday back an hour? Or forwards an hour, based on what people want, There is a broad consensus you can reach so that people in these places can have effectively different time zones. You can go a step further than that and say, why not have just one global time zone? Everyone can agree that right now it's 5:20 PM. In fact, wait, I need to read the news. What time is it right now? They stopped reporting at 2:55. I don't even know. But it's 2:55 right now, let's say, as it is and will forever be based on my live reporting of the shortest day of the year. So it's 2:55 right now. that could just be the global time. That's effectively how we do time zones anyway with UTC, but leave it to the side for computers. So if it's 2:55 everywhere, why don't you just say, sure, yeah, it should be on a, on a sun level, 5 hours behind that in New York. So to do the maths off the top of my head, that means that it'll be 9:55 in the east coast of this continent. And so if it's 9:55 there, that's great for your brain being able to work out the sun. But what if it was still 2:55 there and you just said, yeah, we would have woken up 3 hours ago because we wake up at 11 over here. That is the second valid way to do time zones. Say that we need to have a globally synchronized time more than we need to have this concept of, oh, but I wake up at 8 a.m. 9 to 5s it's great that a 9 to 5 works anywhere in the world right now. It's great to know that 7 p.m. is broadly a time where someone will be asleep. But you could also just learn, instead of having to learn the time zone offset, that, say, instead of knowing that, oh yeah, 7 p.m. is a great time to sleep in the UK, but midnight, wait, would it be midnight? I've broken myself here. 2 p.m. would be a great time to sleep in the US if you were an old woman. But if you were to have that same thing, then you could have a global time where everyone just sleeps and wakes up at different times based on their local sun time. But then you get a little bit crazy sounding, and then you just got to say, okay, let's just walk it all back. Let's just stop changing the clocks back, and based on let's hold a referendum, I would even say. Let's just say, what do most people want? Because as long as we end the time zone changing, we solve most of the problems. We can end up with fewer people, we will spend 0.5% more on electricity, ruining the planet, by the way, terrible. But in exchange, we'll stop having people dying from strokes. We'll stop having people dying from heart attacks and car accidents. And wouldn't that be nice? I think so. But yeah, honestly, or we could go the opposite way and we could say, okay, people don't like the, so again, I'm going to be a daylight savings defender because I don't like wasted daylight. So what if instead, the reason that we're all dying is because we keep changing the clocks twice a year, which is too infrequent to get used to it. Let's change the clocks every day. Based on how much I want to sleep, when I'm in bed at 2 a.m. and I know that I'm going to be waking up at 8 and that's not enough sleep, I'm just going to change my clock back 3 hours. And then I'm going to get like a global consensus going in the night. And when you wake up and when you sleep is entirely based on the whims of everyone around you. We should have no such thing as consistent time, because what I want in my life is for everyone else in the world to work around me and my vague idea of a schedule. Anyway, with that said, I don't want to die in a heart attack, and I don't want you to die from watching this video, but I hope you enjoyed it regardless. Happy shortest day of the year, and remember to, anyone out there, remember to thank your short friends on a day like this one, because this is the only day they get, We have Black History Month, we have all of these other specialized months, but your short friends aren't getting any love except for today, so go send them a friendly message. Anyway, thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and what would you do for the longest day of the year? Do you find your long friend? Anyway, have a good day. Second channel, don't care. Bye.